All right, guys, we got a good show lined up for you today on a Tuesday, windy Tuesday. Is this blustery? I'd say these are blustery conditions. Is that applicable, do you think, J-Dubs? Blustery?
At least.
How would you characterize blustery?
Intermittent.
Intermittent winds?
Yeah.
And you would say this is more than blustery. So you'd say this is gusty. I'd say there's a difference between gusty and blustery, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So this is more gusty, right?
I think so. I've been outside hours.
So we'll call this a gusty day in Charlottesville and Central Virginia. We're going to start the program here shortly. Got a good program lined up for you. Our friend Alex Erpe, CEO of Emergent Financial Services, will join us on the broadcast here in about 20 minutes to highlight everything from local to Commonwealth to Wall Street on today's program. Kathy Wood says, not so fast, my friends, on the inflation claims, the hyperinflation claims from Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter and Square. He sent out a tweet Jack Dorsey did on Sunday that got much of the street buzzing on hyperinflation. And Kathy Wood says, hey, pump the brake, dog. I'm not worried about hyperinflation. We'll talk about that with the man Alex Erpe today on the program. Kathy Wood has quite the reputation and following as the founder and CEO of ARK Invest. We will talk T-minus 3 days to a new city manager being named here in the Charlottesville city of Virginia. This is going to be an interim city manager, but T-minus 3 days until council has to make that announcement. Interestingly, and I'm hearing this from a lot of people, although Mayor Walker has withdrawn from the race, her name is still on the ballot because ballots were printed before her withdrawal announcement. So if you're voting by mail, you will see Mayor Walker's name still on the ballot, and a portion of the population is shotgun voting the mayor despite her withdrawal from the race. Crazy times, this local government. We'll talk about that today on the I Love Seville show. Christmastown in Busch Gardens is right around the corner, about to open. Women are coming back in droves to the labor force. We'll talk about women and the labor force and how women could potentially solve the labor crunch that we're experiencing today. That home in Belmont I brought to everybody's attention, the $1.5 million listing, surprise, 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 is still active and on the market. We will talk about a $1,595,000 house asking on Hinton Avenue in Belmont. UVA football is a 2.5-point underdog currently. They travel to BYU for a late kickoff against Brigham Young. Kickoff 10:15 on national television. That topic and more on the I Love Seville show. Judah Wickhauer, my friend, my comrade, my colleague, my compadre. I'm ready to rock and roll when you are. Good Tuesday afternoon, Jerry Miller, and welcome to the I Love Seville show. Thank you kindly for joining us on a gusty afternoon in Charlottesville, Albemarle County, and in Central Virginia. Of course, we're also live across the Commonwealth and the world on the I Love Seville network. So much to cover on today's program. Alex Erpe, our guest, he will join us in about 20 minutes, the CEO of Emergent Financial Services. We'll talk Kathy Wood and her dispute of hyperinflation, the CEO and founder of ARK Invest. She has quite the reputation, and today she rebutted Twitter and Square founder Jack Dorsey's theory of hyperinflation. I will bring this up with Alex Erpy on the program today. Hyperinflation scares the hell out of me. Alex will ask you to break down in layman's terms what exactly hyperinflation is for our viewers and listeners, and we'll have you assess Kathy Wood's side of the argument and Jack Dorsey's side of the argument today on the program. T-minus 3 days until City Council names an interim city manager for the city of Charlottesville. Of course, the city manager is the chief executive officer, the gentleman or female in charge of day-to-day ops for our fair city. In T-minus 3 days, we will have an interim city manager named. This interim city manager will be in place for, at bare minimum, until the 1st of January, realistically, well into Q1 of 2022, as the new council members have time to get their feet under them on the dais and work together to select a more permanent replacement for Chip Boyles. Also, speaking of council, for those that do not know, Mayor Nakaya Walker, her name still very much on ballots in the city of Charlottesville for the November 2nd election. Now remember, the early voting period is weeks, plural, in advance of the in-person election, which is the 2nd of November. So, I am hearing from folks left and right that are residents of the city of Charlottesville saying, Jerry, Nakaya's name is still on the ballot. What is going on? How is this possible if she's withdrawn from this election? Well, we'll explain why today on the I Love CVille show. UVA football is a 2.5-point underdog. They face BYU on Saturday, 10:15 kick, national television, ESPN2, playing at elevation in Cougar Country at BYU. We'll talk about this football game in a 4-game sprint to the end of the season, the back third of the schedule, where Virginia has BYU, Virginia has Notre Dame, the Pitt Panthers, and the Virginia Tech Hokies. 2 road games, 2 home games, one against an arch nemesis in the Hokies, one against the currently ranked 11th team in the nation at Scott Stadium in the Fighting Irish. Pittsburgh 17 in the country. UVA travels to Heinz Field on the 20th of November. So 3 of the last 4 games on UVA's schedule are ranked opponents in the top 25. And the last game against an unranked opponent is against Virginia Tech, a nemesis of epic proportions where records and rankings do not matter in a Commonwealth clash. We'll talk some macro trends today on the program. 2 in 3 women who left the workplace because of the pandemic now returning to the workforce, seeking employment and income for themselves and their family. We will assess with Alex Erpy, CEO, Emergent Financial Services, how 2 in 3 women who left the workforce, now returning to the workforce with the pandemic slowly getting in our rearview mirror, how this could impact both macro and micro ecosystems. That's a hot topic. A little bit of a fun topic. Christmas Town. One of my favorites. I grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia. My brother and I had Euro Splash passes, season passes to both Busch Gardens and Water Country. And Christmas Town, one of our favorite times to visit Busch Gardens, returns November 12th to Busch Gardens. So holiday goers, visitors, season ticket holders, 2-day passes, 1-day pass, folks can go to Busch Gardens on the 12th of November and usher in the holiday season. We'll talk about that today on the I Love CVille show. Paul Johnson, welcome to the program. Rebecca Hansel, welcome to the program. Juanita Howard, welcome to the program. Folks in Richmond, Short Pump, outside Nashville, Crozet, Charlottesville, and Lynchburg, welcome to the show. The lead of the program is something we should all be following. City Council, Michael Payne, Sina McGill, Lloyd Snook, Micaiah Walker, and Heather Hill. 5 people with tremendous responsibilities have until Friday, close of business Friday, to name a successor to Chip Boyles. He resigned, some would say unexpectedly. His last day as city manager is this Friday, COB. And before Friday COB, our fair counselors must name an interim city manager. And folks, this interim city manager likely will be in place well into the first quarter of next year. Remember, there are 2 spots on council that are open. Brian Pinkston and Juan Diego Wade are the favorites to win those 2 spots on council. It's only fair that local government give Brian Pinkston and Juan Diego Wade a little bit of runway on the dais before they're expected to interview and name more permanently a city manager. So we can expect the interim city manager, who will be named this week in 3 days or less, to be the CEO of the city well into Q1. This is a responsibility that should not be held lightly. Now, here's what we know. Lloyd Snook on Friday, we respect Lloyd Snook on this show, he said Mike Murphy will not be the interim city manager. Mike Murphy at one time held that role for the city of Charlottesville. He also said the city's deputy city manager for operations, Sam Sanders, does not want the job. Sam Sanders, the deputy city manager who knows how to run the city, said, I don't want to deal with that soap opera and the responsibility of being number 1 in the tonal bowl at City Hall. So, in the next 3 days, you could expect an interim to be named and a little bit of clarity in local government. That interim will have tremendous responsibility, shepherding the hiring of new people to fill open positions and working perhaps along council to find a police chief. Tito Durrett in that role right now. We have a lot of respect for Tito, a good man who knows the department inside and out. Perhaps he should be considered for the chief of police in a more permanent or longevity type of role. Now, local government, one other item out of the notebook. Interestingly, Micaiah Walker's name remains on the ballot. The election, the 2nd of November, early voting period literally happening as we speak. Micaiah Walker withdrew from the race at a time and day when ballots were already printed. And as a result, her name on the ballot as we speak right now. I'm curious to see how many votes she will get. There's a contingent on social media that is pushing a single shot vote, only voting for one person, for Micaiah, despite her withdrawal from the election. Whether this influences or impacts the election, only time will tell. But my expectation is a number of people in the mayor's camp will single shot her. Here's another question I have. She's withdrawn from the race. Will the folks that count the votes release the amount of votes that she earned in this election despite withdrawing from this race? I'm going to repeat that and explain it again. It's very confusing. Yes, I know. The mayor has withdrawn from this race, but she did so at a time and date when ballots were already printed. And because the ballots were already printed, there was not time to reprint them and still meet the early voting period. These already printed ballots have been mailed to Charlottesville City residents. Some Charlottesville City residents who are supporters of Nakia Walker are single-shot voting her. I know this because I see the galvanized group on social media. I have two questions for you, viewers and listeners. Will these single-shot voters, a galvanized group in Nakia Walker's corner, influence and impact this election? And the second question I have for you, viewers and listeners, will this galvanized group that is single-shotting Nakia Walker, will their vote results be known or released to the public? Will we know at the end of voting day, 2nd of November, how many votes Nakia got, despite withdrawing from the race? Yet again, the plot thickens. The viscosity of this plot is that of delicious sausage gravy, my friends. The next topic on the program, we pointed out to you a home on Hinton Avenue, 802 Hinton Avenue. In fact, I would encourage everyone to Zillow or look it up on the MLS, 802 Hinton Avenue, a design and build by Steve Nicholson Construction. This home in Belmont has an asking price of $1,595,000. Undoubtedly record-setting territory for a now Tony and popular neighborhood, formerly a blue-collar and working-class neighborhood. The listing went on the market the 12th of September. It is now the 26th of October. 1 month and 14 days, and this market is an eternity. An absolute eternity. A reflection of a $1,595,000 asking price, no doubt. A reflection of a lot size that is synonymous with a postage stamp. A lot size that is, what, 0.14, I believe? Actually, I think it's smaller than that. Boys and girls, $1.6 million in Belmont would shock the HE double hockey sticks out of me if it catches that asking price. In fact, the lot size is 0.08 acres. A postage stamp of land indeed. 6 bedrooms, 4.5 bathrooms, 3,755 square feet, $1,595,000. Beautiful home. Steve Nicholson does great work. I believe his wife is the listing agent with Ness Realty. If this home even flirts with the $1.6 million, you're looking at record-setting territories for Belmont. Vanessa Parkhill, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. Hendersonville, North Carolina, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. Janice McNeil, welcome to the program. Waynesboro and Ocean City, hello. And thank you kindly for joining us. Okay, let's talk macro. This is something I want to discuss with my friend Alex Erpy, who's in our green room right now. Women are coming back to the workforce in droves. In fact, 2 out of 3 women who left the workforce because of some kind of influence decision due to the pandemic are now coming back to work, some seeking new career changes, and all looking to earn more money for themselves or their families. A couple of questions I have. Will the women that are returning to the workforce, and they're coming back by the tens of thousands, if not the hundreds of thousands across this country, will these ladies, these talented, dynamic, intelligent ladies, how will they impact labor shortages across various spaces and industries of commerce? Right now, you can't find folks to, as Johnny Ornalis, wash dishes in restaurants has said. You can't find folks to serve as admins, do accounting. You can't find folks to work in any kind of labor field. This could be a boon for the economy if these open positions are filled by talented folks that are experienced. Granted, they've been on the sidelines perhaps a year and a half, so they may have to shake off some rust, but I would expect this is going to put tailwinds behind a handful of industries. We will chitter-chatter this with the Antonio Banderas of Finance, Alex Erpy, CEO of Emergent Financial Services. Another topic I want to talk with Alex Erpy is hyperinflation. We will start with basic discussion of what is hyperinflation. We will discuss why Jack Dorsey predicts hyperinflation to have a dramatic impact on our economy in the United States very quickly. And then we will assess Cathie Wood, who today, the founder and CEO of ARK Invest, saying, Jack Dorsey, nah, dog, there's no hyperinflation coming. Prices are going to chill, they're going to calm, they're going to cool, they're going to get collected. Right after Christmas, pump your brakes. And in the words of Lee Corso, not so fast, my friend. That topic with Alex Erpy in T-minus 60 seconds, Judah Wickower. Christmas Town, opening in Busch Gardens the 12th of November. I bring this up to you because at a time like this, when the holidays are so important for all of us, to have Christmas Town in Busch Gardens on the 12th of November and an opportunity to walk around a theme park that I grew up in is a lot of fun. My brother and I, my family and I, we spent a lot of time there. And Christmas Town is A+ and very enjoyable. The 12th of November, Busch Gardens. Put it on your calendar. And on that note, I very much encourage you guys to consider Winter Wonder at the Boar's Head Resort. The Boar's Head Resort is planning and organizing a light show right now on its grounds of memorable proportions. I would encourage your friends and family to take trips from all over the Commonwealth. Stay at the Boar's Head Resort. They have a Winter Wonder package. Folks that are local in Central Virginia in the Shenandoah Valley, Winter Wonder is the lighting of the grounds of Boar's Head for festive fun running November, December, and January. It's going to be gorgeous and beautiful. I've had a sneak peek. Judah Wickower is our director. Let's welcome Alex Erpy, if we could, with Ray Cadell watching the program. Hello, my friend Ray Cadell. Let's talk, first, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jay. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you, too. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure indeed. Not only the CEO of Emergent Financial Services, but the co-star of Today y Mañana with the closer, Xavier Yerpy, Thursdays at 10:15 a.m. on the I Love Seville Network. Questions coming in for Alex Erpy already. Nice. Women in the workforce. I'm reading a CNBC article today. This CNBC article says 2 in 3 women who left the workforce because of COVID, and we know the brunt of job loss and family responsibility and child care, unfortunately, fell on women. We thought that was going to happen. That's what exactly happened. Now a MetLife survey of 2,000 U.S. workers conducted in September has acknowledged that 2 in 3 women who left the workforce because of COVID are now sprinting back to the workforce. Your thoughts on this, Alex Erpy?
That's positive news, because I think one of the issues we've seen in this labor shortage that we've had is that childcare obviously was taking a long time to come back. And there's reasons for that, obviously. Obviously, children are going to be the last in line to be vaccinated because that's not even determined whether that's going to happen yet. But of course, childcare takes the longest to come back because it's a very hands-on business. And we saw a lot of pullback in childcare options. School obviously went on Zoom basically last year. And as that goes away, I think now we're obviously going to see women, my hope is that now that we're seeing that women don't have to, they have options. Obviously, they're sending their kids back to school. They don't have to be schooling them at home. They can now re-enter the workforce. Anything that boosts the number of people out there able to fill positions is a benefit. It remains to be seen how much that's going to have an impact, mainly because we've had more people available to work than job was correction. We've had more people on the more job openings than there are people willing to work. So the more people you can put in there, the better. At the same time, there was 10 million job openings, I believe, and 8 million looking for work as of a month ago. There was already plenty of people able to fill part of those 10 million jobs. They weren't being filled. So we might still see some people waiting, either pushing for more wages or trying to move into different industries. So I'm not saying this is going to be a magic boon and suddenly the job market will be filled by these women coming back, but anything that increases that pool such that you can get some of those 10 million jobs openings filled, I think is going to be a benefit.
Help me understand this. You're the genius. We just listened to you. Okay? Help me understand this. If you have more people in the workforce, it seems employers have more talent to choose from. And if they have more people in the workforce and more talent to choose from, this could be the leverage an employer may need to keep wages perhaps in check.
Oh, I agree with that. I think obviously labor moves just like everything else in terms of supply and demand. The more you have of something, the less expensive it is. So the more labor you have, the less expensive it is for an employer to find labor. One of the challenges that's been interesting about this particular environment is, and I'm sure Johnny Ornelas and a lot of the small businesses here can attest to this, there's been a period here where you can't find labor at any price. In other words, it's not necessarily a price sometimes, it's people not wanting to come back to work, period. So the question is, once you can get that over that kind of hump, and you get people being able to work back at a price, then the more you have in the labor market, the more that employers will be able to find a price that's probably more amenable to them, particularly if you're a really small business.
Alex Erpe, CEO of Emergent Financial Services, a couple more stats on this topic. According to the MetLife survey, more than half, 56% of the women say they've thought about a career change during the pandemic. That's more than double the 1 in 4 women who felt the same way prior to the pandemic. So 56% of the women returning to the labor force are thinking or pursuing a career change. Prior to the pandemic, 25% of women wanted a career change. What do you make of that?
That's a double. It's not surprising. I think we've seen that anecdotally throughout the coming out of this pandemic, that a lot of people took last year to kind of rethink what they actually want to do in life. Obviously, I think that's also partly because of what we've seen with wages. In other words, not to be cynical, but it's easier to contemplate a career change when you have more leverage to be able to say, hey, you know what, I can afford to wait and aim for a higher paying job because I know that job is out there. So obviously, as the leverage changes and as more people enter the workforce, again, not to be cynical about it, the opportunities to say, yes, I'm thinking of changing my career are going to lessen, because you may have to say, I have to take this job now because this job may not be here if I change my mind in 2 months. Whereas right now, let's face it, if you were in the restaurant industry and you're saying, I'm contemplating a career change, in the last 6 months, you had a pretty good idea that if you waited 6 months to make up your mind and whether you want to change or not, that job was still going to be waiting for you. In fact, that job still is waiting for you if you decide to go back to the restaurant industry. So obviously, the more job openings there are, the more leverage you have to make that kind of decision. The fewer job openings there are as we continue to get out of this pandemic, then the less opportunity you have to take the chance of, let me take 2 months off to decide if I want to switch businesses.
Alex Erpe, CEO of Emergent Financial Services. Ray Cadell streaming the show in his car. He says, I'm on the road to perform with the Temptations tomorrow, but I'm listening in my car right now. Thank you, Ray Cadell. And good luck performing with the Temptations. Quite impressive. One more stat from this MetLife survey who said 2 in 3 women who left the workforce due to the pandemic are now returning to the labor force. The MetLife survey also reports women are overwhelmingly looking for increased flexibility. 78% want increased flexibility and career progression opportunities. 73% said they want to be able to climb the ladder. So I'll give you those stats again. 2 in 3 women returning to the labor force now that left the labor force due to the pandemic. Of those 2/3, 78% insist upon work hour flexibility, and 73% insist on being able to climb the totem pole quickly. What do you think?
Which makes sense. I mean, particularly the flexibility, I would say. I think the last 12 months, obviously, if you got a taste of work from home and you like that kind of flexibility, you are going to want to see that going forward, particularly if you hold leverage. If you hold leverage to say, hey, I can advocate for myself that I want this flexibility.
And you could say the workforce has never had more leverage than they do right now.
Oh, exactly.
Is that fair?
Has, not that, I mean, it's been a while since I can recall. I don't think since I have been in finance, I've seen the workforce with as much leverage as they have now. Because really, I mean, we were still, up until 2015, 2016, we're still coming out of recession. So the workforce does not have great leverage. Wages, obviously, were kept down a lot. Now we're seeing wages since 2016 plus go up, and they've really skyrocketed over the last year, obviously, because of that shortage. And so I think there's a lot of leverage to be able to do that, and then of course a lot of leverage to be able to say, hey, I want positions with advancement, not positions that are dead ends. Because obviously those positions come with increased pay and increased flexibility as you go up the ladder.
Alex, I want to throw Kathy Wood versus Jack Dorsey, a brouhaha of epic proportions. Jack Dorsey, CEO of Square, CEO of Twitter, founder of both. Kathy Wood, CEO and founder of ARK Invest. Jack Dorsey says, get ready for hyperinflation. It's going to dramatically impact this country. Kathy Wood today says, nah, Jack, hyperinflation is going to cool down after the holidays. Wait and see. Before we get into this, explain hyperinflation to everybody.
So hyperinflation is inflation of an extreme degree. So if you think of inflation, in other words, let's say you've looked at the inflation we're having now. You know intuitively bread, when you go to the store, milk, more expensive than it was 6 months ago. Now imagine if you go to the store and you know that milk tomorrow is going to be twice as expensive as it was today. The $3 gallon of milk is now going to be a $6 gallon of milk tomorrow. And then it might be 12 in a year. That's hyperinflation. So you're talking very large inflation rates. So if you think about how difficult it's been for people with 5 to 6% inflation over the last year, hyper means, I mean, you're taught sometimes if you think of countries like Zimbabwe with hyperinflation, you're talking 1,000% inflation, over 100%. So from year to year, the price of everything in the country doubles. And your money basically becomes worthless. I mean, you have people, I think of hyperinflation, there would be people in Weimar Germany where the classic case, Venezuela I think had this sometimes, where basically you show up with like a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy a loaf of bread because your dollar is like completely worthless. And so you had a whole bunch of issues with that. And so that's hyperinflation. It's this crazy, out of control inflation environment.
Kathy Wood tweets this, and she retweets Jack's tweet and adds commentary on top of Jack Dorsey's tweet. First, I'll give you Jack Dorsey's tweet. Again, the CEO of Square and the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey. Hyperinflation is going to change everything. It's happening. Get ready. That's Jack Dorsey. Kathy Wood retweets with quote Jack's tweet and says this: in 2008, 2009, when the Fed started quantitative easing, I thought that inflation would take off. I was wrong. Instead, velocity, the rate at which money turns over per year, declined, taking away its inflationary sting. Velocity still is falling. Give us some insight.
Interesting. So that's a classic, definitely some economics 101 here, money and banking. I should have this 3300 class at UVA, money and banking. Basically, there's two things that lead to inflation, and that you need to have inflation, I should say. The first is the money supply increases, so you have too much money for the number of goods that are out there.
So we have that.
We have that.
Because, we'll tell them why.
Well, because we printed it.
Stimulus.
Stimulus printed it.
Yeah.
The Federal Reserve printed it.
Okay.
So if there's
We
two
flooded
ways,
it.
We flooded it. There's really, sometimes people forget there's two ways money supply increases. One is Federal Reserve does what's called quantitative easing. That's what she's referring to, where basically Federal Reserve makes money out of thin air and lends it to banks. So basically increasing it that way. The other way that money supply increases is fiscal, which is the other side, Congress basically. If Congress spends $4 trillion that it doesn't have, the Federal Reserve has to create that money out of thin air. It basically has to lend the money to the Treasury because Congress spent money that did not exist at the time they spent it. And so those are two ways that money supply increases. Now, to have inflation, you need money supply increasing and an either steady or increasing velocity. And velocity of money is basically, the simple way to put it is people going out and exchanging dollars. So if you think about it, right, if let's say the government gives me $1,000, and I come and then I say, Jerry, I'm going to pay you $1,000 to do marketing consulting for me. Now I was $1,000 richer. You're now $1,000 richer. Now you go to Judah and you're like, Judah, I want you to work double time. Here's $1,000. Judah's now $1,000 richer. So that $1,000, by virtue of all of us spending it, has now increased to it's generated $3,000 worth of economic activity. That's the velocity of money. But if I take the $1,000 that the government gives me and I say, I'm really nervous.
And hoard it.
I'm just hoarding. I must have stick this $1,000 in my pocket and I'm not doing anything with it. Then the velocity of money is low because I have chosen not to spend, lend, or invest this money. I'm literally just sitting on it. And so instead of $3,000 worth of activity, it's a one-to-one. The $1,000 that the government gave me is still the same $1,000. So, and there's no inflation there because there's no increased demand for you. There's no increased demand for Judah. There's no increased demand for Judah buying little doggy treats for Liza. It's all staying in my pocket with the $1,000. So what Kathy Wood is essentially arguing is people
are nervous.
Are not increasing the rate at which money is being moved around the economy.
They're saving.
They're saving. Banks are not lending. There's another way this happens is with banks lending. People are not necessarily investing at major rates to really circulate this money. And investment doesn't quite do the same circulation as lending does. But as if I invest $1,000 in Coca-Cola and Coca-Cola doesn't spend the $1,000 of share price increase that they have, then there's no continuation of the $1,000 that I invested. So what she's saying is that you can't have inflation. Now, I would argue she's wrong in this sense. I
was going to ask you, who's right here?
I would argue, as strange as this sounds, I think they're both wrong.
Okay.
For different reasons.
Okay.
I think she's wrong in her claim that she was incorrect about the claim of inflation back in 2008.
Okay.
Because I would argue that we did see inflation after 08, 09, but that it went into the stock market.
Okay.
But as you saw a stock market boom from basically the bottom of the recession all the way up through 2020, basically, that really for the first couple of years, 09, 2010, 2011, 2012, was not grounded in any kind of economic reality. The economy was not growing commensurate with the way the stock market took off. And you sit there, well, it makes total sense. Fed pumps $4 trillion into the banks. I don't know about you, but banks didn't seem to be lending very frequently in 2010, 2011. What did they do? Banks put the money into the stock market. Banks lent to companies who bought back their own stock. So I would argue we did see inflation, just not in average goods in the stock market. The inflation was channeled into there for a number of years.
Is stock market inflation a good kind of inflation?
It depends on...
If you're in the game?
It depends on how tied it is to economic reality and when the game ends. Because when you put money in there and you create like a little acid bubble like that, you never want to be... if the bubble pops, it's bad. If it begins to like tail down and you have not control, but I would say if it goes down like an escalator a little bit, which rarely happens, then you can come back in line. If you have 10% corrections, people have time to react and change. If it gets popped and it comes down like an elevator, like they say, then you're in trouble. So it's not always a good thing because it also makes companies less efficient. So if I'm Apple and I can borrow from the bank at 0, invest in my own stock and make like 3%, I'm going to do that. Because that's no risk. Just 0, I'm borrowing at like some extremely low rate from a bank and buying back my own stock. There's no risk I'm going to make that move. But the shame is that now I'm not investing in any kind of R&D. I'm not thinking...
Innovation.
I'm not innovating. And that hurts in the long time. That's why really heavily indebted economies, you begin to see less innovation long term because you're funneling your capital into quick fixes, quick bucks. Like, okay, buy back my stock, to do some more dividends, get people to buy this stock. Don't invest in this project, because this project is a risk and stock buyback is not. And so that's the issue with that kind of stock market inflation. The interesting thing about Jack Dorsey's is that I'm curious why he's going to that extreme level of assumption in terms of hyperinflation, because it seems to me there's a lot of room for bad news. If you think inflation is here to stay, there's a lot of room between inflation is here to stay and hyperinflation.
Well, is he, okay, and help me understand here. Is he alluding to a labor force that has a lot of openings? Is he alluding to oil and gas prices upticking? Is he alluding to grandmas and grandpas sprinting like we talked about last year to buy Christmas gifts in October, making shelves bare? I mean, everywhere you look, cost of goods are up.
They are up, but it's just, what makes me curious, I think he's alluding to all those things, and maybe in fact also alluding to just the enormous amount of spending that is potentially coming our way. I mean, we already did $4 trillion last year, and I think we have another 4 that could potentially be on the way. And so he may be alluding to all of that. What I find curious is that I think a more reasonable scenario in terms of our recent history is the stagflation of the 1970s.
Ooh.
Right, where you have, and stagflation.
Explain stagflation.
Stagflation means, just typically when you have inflation, the economy is also growing. In other words, everything's becoming more expensive, but there's a lot of activity going on, so your unemployment rate is also low. So anyone can find jobs, it's just that everything you're buying is more expensive. Stagflation of the 1970s kind is when you have a bad economy and you have high inflation. So
and unemployment is high.
And unemployment's high. So you can't find a job, you're not getting paid very much, and everything
and the cost of goods
is up. And so
that's no bueno.
That's not good at all.
Yeah.
And it seems to me if you were really worried that this kind of inflation that we're seeing, this 5 to 6%, is going to persist and cause economic damage, that's what I would think would be the more likely scenario than the hyperinflation scenario, just because there seem to be a lot of outlets. Again, I too would have thought, you had told me back in 2008, Federal Reserve is going to print $4 trillion. We are going to be below the debt level to the kazoo. We're going to be, I think this was 4 years ago, we were at 100 trillion in unfunded liabilities for the government. So if you think about, like, as bad as the debt is, you look at the debt at 16 trillion, unfunded liabilities is all the things the government has promised to spend. So that includes like future Social Security, all that. Things that the government has promised to spend but aren't officially on the books. It's an accounting gimmick. That's over 100 trillion 4 years ago, 5 years ago now. So typically when you have this level of debt, you might suspect hyperinflation, but we've just seen that it's not the way our economy is set up and the way people react is not what it once was. Because you really can't have that kind of hyperinflation unless you've got people, like sitting in cash and spending all their money instantly to do that crazed. And the money supply just does not seem to be proliferating that way. People still have faith in the US dollar. They don't, like the average person doesn't sit there and say, my dollar is worthless. And you kind of need to reach that point to get hyperinflation. You need to reach the point at which people say, this piece of paper in my wallet is functionally worthless. And I don't think we're there yet.
Let's get to the closer's commentary.
Oh, what's he giving us?
Xavier Yerpe, the CIO of Emergent Financial Services. But that inflation did not cause angst among consumers, Alex. As long as housing market continues to grow, inflation will exist. The consumer has taken stimulus and switched from spending on services to buying goods and fixing homes. That demand has increased inflation on goods. Mm-hmm. The government would love hyperinflation. The consumer would not.
Oh, and I agree with him completely. That's what we're seeing. The consumer is still out there spending, and the consumer hasn't lost faith in the value of the dollar, which is, I think, one of the prerequisites. You look at the places where it's happened, people just sit there and say, this is worthless, this dollar. But he's also right that The one entity that would not mind hyperinflation is the government, mainly because it is the number one debtor
I was
in the
gonna
entire
say.
country.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. If you owe $100 trillion, right, and now that inflation is so hyper that $100 trillion is like worthless. It's only actually worth $10 million. That's great. I mean, think about it. If you take $100 trillion and you make the dollar worth 1/100th, so you cut the value of the dollar by 100 because of inflation, hyperinflation. Now the government says, well, I don't actually owe $100 trillion. I only owe $1 trillion. This is fantastic. Your debt essentially becomes more and more worthless. Because you would always love, if you owe someone money, you always love it if the money you pay them 10 years from now is worth less than money today.
And you've made that analogy before of me borrowing money from you, and the payback terms are next year versus tomorrow.
Exactly. Because, I mean, think about it. If you lent me, if you borrowed let's just say $100 from me, and you say, Alex, I'll pay you back in 10 years. You would love it if we have 5% inflation for the next 10 years. Because that means the $100 you pay me back in 10 years isn't going to be worth $100. It's more valuable to you today than in 10 years. So as a debtor, you want that. For me as the lender or the saver, I sit there and say, oh, that $100 Jerry pays me in 10 years ain't going to be worth nothing. So that's not good for me. So, and of course, if I'm an average person spending money, I also don't want to see that inflation. Really, it's major debtors that would love to see inflation. There is no bigger debtor right now than the United States government.
One of our most intelligent listeners has offered a comment.
Oh,
Vanessa.
Vanessa, thank you for watching.
Vanessa Parco.
She always has great comments.
She does. Common sense lady here. I was a kid in a struggling steel town during the 1970s. I pray my kids and your kids never have to live through times like those. When she grew up in a struggling steel town in the 1970s. So why don't we do this? You think both Dorsey, both Kathy Wood are flawed in some capacity with their analysis.
I do.
You've touched on this. Catherine Dabney, welcome to the program. You've touched on this briefly of what you think is going to happen. When we get through the Christmas season, okay, will we see the velocity of money continue at the pace that we're seeing now? Or will we see that velocity slow? The second question I have for you, there's no more stimulus coming. At least I hope there's no more stimulus coming.
We'll see.
I mean, maybe others want stimulus. I don't want any more stimulus. Please, no more stimulus, okay? We don't need any more stimulus. Do you see a slowing of this economy next year?
That's beginning to be, I think, Xavier's concern and my concern, is that if the inflation that we're seeing, inflation is beginning to seep into consumer confidence. And what I mean by that is, just think of yourself as the average person, right? If I told you, Jerry, everything's going to be more expensive for the next 2-3 months, but then it's going to stop and it's going to just stabilize prices. You might be annoyed by it. You'll say, that stinks. I don't want to have to pay more for my groceries for the next 3 months. But you're not going to really panic about it, and you're not going to try to start hoarding money or try to go out and buy tons of stuff because you're worried that the next 3 months is going to be bad. You don't panic about it. If I tell you, Jerry, we're going to have 5 to 6% inflation for the foreseeable future, but I'm not, and I told you it was going to be really short term, but now you're sitting here and you're saying, Alex, you said it was going to be 3 months, but now it's been 6, and I'm looking ahead, and the next 3 months look like it's going to be worse, and the Federal Reserve, which said this was temporary, now says, well, we might be looking at it a longer period of time. Now you start to get nervous as the consumer. Now you start to sit there and say, I need to be really cautious with my money.
You need to save.
I need to start
Velocity
saving.
slows.
I need to start holding velocity slows, right? And now you start getting into a question where if people pull back too much, you now have a declining economy.
I'm no expert. You're the expert. Xavier's the expert. Nicholas is the expert. I'm just a guy that uses some common sense for reasonable thinking. I see the velocity of money slowing down. I see people saving. I see people hoarding. I see next quarter more labor entering the workforce. I see some of these these businesses that are providing services for customers, like the home industry. I see that ridiculous pace of business. I hate to say this because we have a lot of clients. We have some clients on this side. I see that slowing. I see the housing sector already showing signs of cooling. Xavier, I would love if you guys talked about this on Thursday, but I feel the economy's in a bit of a vulnerable spot.
Third quarter GDP has not come out yet, but there is a tool called the Fed out of Atlanta runs a tool called GDP Now, which is a real-time estimate of where they see GDP tracking. And Xavier can correct me if I'm misremembering this number. Last I heard, that thing was sub 2%. And so you sit there and say, it's not even an issue of like, do we need the economy to, is the economy going to turn negative GDP? The concern that we have is we had a massive decline last year. And if we only get let's say we get 96% of the way back to where we were in January of 2020, that's a 4% drop. That is a major recession. So in other words, granted, it's hard to envision because we had such a steep drop.
Because we've recovered so quickly.
Because we've recovered so quickly. It looks like a V. But if you start your V up here and your V ends 4% short of where you were, that is a massive recession. I mean, if I told you we were going to have 2 quarters of minus 4% GDP, that's a recession. And so my concern is if we don't get back there 100%, you are talking recession and you are going to begin to see repercussions. We don't notice it now because, of course, when you go from no one can work, like because everyone needs to stay at home, to 94% of people are back working, you forget that 6% of people are not back working. And that if that persists, that's recession. So that is our only concern. I mean, the housing thing, if you're reading, you're much better at the leading indicators of housing than I am. Obviously,
I wouldn't say that.
I feel like you and Keith are in the market a little more. You can sort of see, because we rely on the numbers that, as a financial person, we rely on numbers that tend to come out afterwards. So you see housing, I think just housing prices has now surpassed the 2006 peak. And that has been, I think, a tremendous headway. In other words, when the consumer
can't afford,
has trouble buying things, they at least feel confident if their house price is going up. In other words, when you see your 401k and your home value going up and behind us, then you should really see some issues because the other signs in terms of your day-to-day living are not positive right now.
This guy's a smart dude. Your brother's chiming in. He says, Alex is right. Even in times when money had a value such as gold or silver, it was about losing faith in the government value of the money. And Xavier says the latest GDP is now 0.5%. Xavier, I mean, madre chico.
Which is not good.
That's not good.
That's not good.
And he says the velocity of money will continue to slow. Mike McLaughlin has some questions for us, and he says, if your prediction is a slowing economy in the first quarter of next year, then how does that change investing strategy?
That's a great question. It changes your investment strategy because I think you try to become more protective. And what I mean by that is not in cash, especially because if you think about it, if there's inflation, cash is the worst.
Cash is trash.
Cash is trash, exactly. But what you do is you become more defensive. In other words, you go to stocks that are more defined as defensive stocks. So your big dividend payers, you don't want to be, and by big, I don't mean large yield. In other words, not someone who's paying a lot of money in dividends, but someone who has consistently paid dividends. So someone who's unlikely to cut their dividend. Because sometimes you're going to find those small cap companies that are offering like a 6-8% dividend yield. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your long-term brand names that have paid 2 to 3% dividend yield for the past 25 something years. So you begin to shift into those. You think your utility stops. You think you're basically your
Johnson and Johnson, your Bristol Myers,
your Johnson & Johnson, your Coca-Colas, your boring names.
Yeah. Right.
Where they don't give you the thrill
Right.
of, oh yeah, this guy's going to double in the next 12 months.
Where you start like, oh, the stock went up 5% this year. Well, that's not bad.
That's not bad.
That's not bad.
Exactly. Well,
You
you log in
lose
each
money.
day. You logged in each day and said, it's up $1.
Yeah.
My investment's up $1, but at least it's not down $1.
Yeah, no.
Kind
I
of
think we
investment.
all got spoiled, Alex, and we've all, like, me included. I mean, I was talking about this with a buddy, and I was talking about this with a buddy, and then the conversation also came up with my dad. And we were talking about, I forget which position it was. I think it was QQQ. Was that an ETF tied to the NASDAQ? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, and I said something like, man, QQQs, and granted the NASDAQ's had some tough sledding of late. Mm-hmm. And I said, it's not really moving much. He said, son. When he starts by saying son, I know I'm going to get some kind of lesson. And I just stop and listen. He goes, son, a couple of points every quarter is a 6 to 8% climb at the end of the year. And if you have a bunch of 6 to 8% climbs at the end of the year across a portfolio with 30 to 50 positions, you're doing okay.
You're doing all right. People forget if you earn...
Because we got seduced by the
year.
Teslas, the NVIDIA. I mean, NVIDIA's up 8% right now.
2020 is one of those fluky things where, the market crashes in March and then the thing just shoots up like a rocket for the rest of the year. I mean, everyone felt that they were a genius at the end of 2020.
Yeah.
Let's face it, we all looked at our portfolios and were like,
yes.
I'm a genius.
I know.
I'm a genius.
Hold on. Where's the money? That's what we were thinking.
Like, yes, I picked all the winners. And then, you look back and you're like, wait a second, everything was a winner.
Yeah.
I didn't pick the winners.
Right.
Everything was a winner last year. And now you get back to what I would argue this is a more normal year, market-wise. Because nothing's showing up like crazy. But before we get too dour, my dad keeps reminding me, just like your dad, he doesn't start with son, but he'll be like,
Does he start with hijo?
Hijo mío. And he goes, we still have not had a 5% decline in the S&P 500. Like you sit there and you get nervous. The S&P 500 hasn't even had a period this year where it has declined by 5%. And we get worried when there's like a sub 1% decline where it turns red. We're like, oh, this year it's not a great year. My dad said it hasn't even gone down, but there's been no corrections of 5%, let alone 10. It's not that bad of a year. And people forget, because we want the bid. There's nothing the excitement of the bid gains.
Yeah, the Tesla,
But
the NVIDIA, which is up literally 6.88% today alone.
Which is fantastic.
Which is fantastic.
It's fantastic. You realize if you locked in, like if you bought NVIDIA, your position goes up 6%, 6.8, almost 7%. You sell that thing. You've locked in a 7% yearly gain. If you average 7% a year, you double your money every 10 years. So if you have a $50,000 portfolio and you do something as simple and boring, in other words, and basically every year you invested this thing, you had one NVIDIA that went up 7% a day, you sold that thing. You say, I don't even want more gains. I got 7% for my year, I'm done. That 50,000 becomes 100 in 10 years. In 20 years, it becomes 200. In 30 years, it becomes 400. So you're sitting there, and imagine most people you're continuing to save. These things skyrocket, and that's with 7%, which sounds like the most boring. After 2020, you sit there and say, you want to earn 7% this year in your entire portfolio, and people will be like, oh, that sounds kind of
I know. Yeah.
I was up 30-something, 40, 50 last year. If you do that very boring 7% on average every year, then you double your money every 10 years. And where else can you do that? Do you sit there and say, my money's going to double every 10 years? And it's the simple things. And the key is you don't want those times. You don't want to be chasing. In other words, you don't want to sit there and be like, dang, my portfolio, I went too aggressive, my portfolio crashed 50%, now I sell it, now I don't participate in the upside. You just have to be the slow and steady. There's a reason that fable with the tortoise and the hare has been around since ancient Greek times, because it's true. It's exciting to be the hare, but you don't want to put yourself in a position where you are so loaded in tech stocks because last year was so great and you want that feeling again, that now suddenly tech, which is the most volatile, one of the most volatile parts of the market, crashes, and you hadn't like taken some of your gains.
Yeah.
You hadn't diversified away. Because when you diversify like that, right, what are you doing? You're selling high and you're buying low. Because if you sit there in your tech portfolio, let's say your tech portion of your portfolio, you had it 50-50, tech and defensive, and your tech like spiked and your defensive like just stayed the same. If you rebalance, if you diversify away from tech, say I'm going to sell some of my positions, go here and get it back to 50-50. What did you do? You sold tech high.
And you bought defense low.
And you bought defense low. So if things, granted, I mean, it could be that the tech will still keep going. You've still got some tech. But if things go south now, you just increased your position of defense, which will now do better.
Well done, Alex Erpy. S&P 500 up 23% this year, the closer says. And he also, this is a great way to close. Xavier, excellent stuff. It's not about timing the markets. It is about time in the markets. That's got to be one of his favorite axioms. Is that one of his favorites?
That's a great quote. I think you just thought that up. I haven't heard.
Did you just come up with that, Xavier?
I think you just came up with that.
That's fantastic. Let's repeat that from the closer. It's not about timing the markets. It is about time in the markets. Xavier, this is for Xavier right here. Well done, closer. Did I see the closer? Was that Mrs. Erpy in the photo that I believe Nicholas took at the Seaville Crafts?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it was. She came out to the Seaville Crafts.
I saw her on social media. I liked it, Mrs. Erpy. All right, why don't we close with this? Today y mañana. The show is yours, my friend.
Today mañana got a fun one for us this Thursday, 10:15 a.m. on the one and only I Love Seaville Network. We got two sets of guests. So first, Carolina Galledo Orbando is going to join us, and she does Carolina Orbando Beauty. So she does beauty products, helping people with their appearance, so the hair and so forth. Has her own, I think, salon in Crozet. So great little Latina entrepreneur that we're going to feature on the show and talk to. Just learn about her business, what she does, how she came to be an entrepreneur in that space. And then Stephanie Delvada of Seaville Picnic is going to join us. She's going to decorate the set a little bit, a little October theme on the table. So we got a little Halloween theme for us. So have you ever had someone? I mean, she's not to like cover everything. Have you ever had someone like decorate?
No, this is the first time.
Wow, so
Xavier and Nicholas, I'm extremely excited and somewhat scared, but I think it's going to go extremely well.
It's going to go great. Well. She's going to put she sets up those beautiful picnics, so she'll give us a little taste.
It's going to be
wonderful. Give us a little taste of an artful taste of what she does.
Oh, great!
For a fall picnic theme, a Halloween picnic theme. And then she's going to be joined by someone from Glenmore Farms. A guest from Glenmore Farms, which is one of the partners that she works with.
Nice.
Where people will go out there to have their picnic, and she will set it up for them.
Dude, Xavier, Alex, Nicholas, Michael Erpy, Emergent Financial Services, give them a call, reach out to them. You see what they're all about. Emergent Financial Services, guys, to build your wealth and just have a sounding board when it comes to economic and financial decisions in your life. This Erpy family, fine by me in my book, A++.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
My friend, Thursday, we cannot wait. I have missed a few in person, but I have caught all the replays. I watched them or listened to them either in real time or post time, every single one, and you guys do a hell of a job and just make complicated matters and material very approachable. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for the knowledge, and you have a good afternoon.
It's a joy.
I feel the same. I look forward to Tuesdays. He had no idea what we were talking about today, again, and he crushed it. Thank you so much, Alex Erpy. So guys, as we get the final details out here of the notebook on the I Live Seaville show, I am very excited for Thursday's broadcast. This Thursday, Dr. Bobby Chabra. Take care, Alex. This Thursday, a world-class surgeon in studio, Dr. Bobby Chabra. Not only is this literally an individual who is #1 in the world in his field. He is #1 in the world, Dr. Bobby Chabra, in his field. He travels with the basketball and sports teams at UVA and was in person at the national championship. Leader at UVA Health, a man who's opening with his team a world-class clinic and facility on Ivy Road, Dr. Bobby Chabra, Thursday, 12:30, I Love Seville show. Put it on your calendar now. It's going to be an awesome interview. For Alex Erpy, for Judah Wickower, my name is Jerry Miller, and this is the I Love Seville show. You guys take care.